Rachel and Joe.
I mean, I might do it, seeing as how Rachel's just hanging there. I'll just welcome people to the platform.
Yeah, Rachel isn't quite back yet. If could, and we'll take it from there.
Oh. Myself around. I can remember how to do that.
Here we go. Oh, my browser. Oh, there it is. Okay, so did you guys manage to get it open at all?
I got it.
Yeah, I have no idea how to scroll down, but there's the questions anyway, which is good.
Hey, let us know when we're live, Carlos. Do a quick intro.
Am I standing okay? Yeah.
Hey. Hi. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first talk in our virtual reality festival campus, Carlow Arts Festival and Visual at this wonderful site. Welcome, welcome. Also live streaming on YouTube, which we're thrilled about. So if you're not in this beautiful space with us, you can hang out with us on YouTube. Our moderator for this evening is Rachel O'Dwyer, and she is joined here with Martin. Martin, can you give me your full title, please?
I'm Martin Zeilinger. I'm a lecturer in computational art at Abertay University in Dundee, Scotland.
Fantastic. And Rachel, I should ask you for your own biog as well before we start.
Oh, no problem. So I was going to get everyone to introduce themselves, but I'm Rachel O'Dwyer, and I'm a lecturer in School of Visual Cultures in NCAD in Dublin, or a lecturer in digital cultures.
Wonderful. And Inte, if you would just give us a brief intro as well, that would be great. And then we'll leave you to kick off.
Yeah, my name is Inte Gloerich, and I am a researcher at the Institute of Network Cultures at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, and I'm doing a PhD on blockchain imaginaries.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So we're all very excited to be here and talk a little bit about NFTs. So we gave just a very brief introduction there, kind of in terms of our names and our job titles. But what I thought we might do to kick off is just maybe we could each say how we got interested in blockchain, or maybe specifically in art and money. Maybe I'll kick off with Inte. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you actually got into this space and studying blockchain imaginaries?
Yeah, sure. So at the Institute of Network Cultures, we have, we research a lot of kind of digital technologies and in relation to economy and culture. Money Lab, and that was really centered on financial technologies and like potentials for kind of democratizing finance and thinking of alternatives also in the cultural sector. And blockchain, as you can imagine, early on already started to be one of those technologies that was really central in that project. And yeah, it's always kind of been interesting to me to kind of go beyond the dominant narrative that we hear about blockchain, and specifically major cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, where it's all about kind of making lots and lots of money for a few people, and thinking about how those technologies can be used for other purposes as well, thinking of other ways of being together, and how those technologies could kind of facilitate alternative economies and cultures.
Fantastic. So I think, yeah, we definitely want to come back to this idea of the less sort of mainstream approaches to thinking about blockchain and NFTs, like how can it actually facilitate, new sorts of ways of thinking, as you said, about community or about cultural production. I'm going to just hand over to Martin. So I've known both of you for quite a while, but I don't think I've ever really asked you how you got into this particular space. So Martin, how did you actually get interested in blockchain and art?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the three of us have a lot of overlaps, but maybe when we do overlap, we're at some high intensity event where we're all trying to catch every talk that's happening or other things like that. So we might not have had this particular conversation before. So I don't know how I got into this really. I've always been really interested in experimental uses of emerging technology by contemporary artists, visual artists, sound artists, artists. And so naturally, the blockchain, when it came to be and when the technology became more widely available, was very quickly a medium, a technological environment that was really relevant to that and super interesting. And so I think all the three of us probably first met at one of the Money Lab events, I would imagine, maybe the one in Amsterdam a few years ago. I don't know. So they already mentioned this event series, and I've been to many of them. I know Rachel has as well. I've actually organized one of them in London a couple of years as well, a couple of years ago. So my interest really, in a nutshell, is in how artists are engaging with this technology in order to explore how it works, but also how it doesn't work, how it really just kind of reinvents and perpetuates infrastructures or hierarchies that are really very problematic, that are hyper capitalist or that are all about financializing creative practice. And so a key interest of mine is artistic uses of blockchain technology that try to do something different, or that, I don't know, for lack of a better way of saying it, you might experiment with hacking the blockchain or exploring the fringes of what the technology enables us to do. So,
So yeah, I was just going to say, I guess maybe a little bit about that, how I got into this space.
yeah.
So yeah, I guess actually funny, it was kind of through Money Lab as well, Inte. So sorry, I'm just going to move around a little bit here. So I got kind of interested in money right after my PhD. So I did my PhD actually on radio spectrum, so nothing at all really to do with money. But I remember seeing kind of an advertisement for the first Money Lab then in 2014, and something really kind of coming home to me at that particular moment in time, that money is a technology like any other technology, and that it's one that, with the development of things like Bitcoin, that's increasingly kind of open to interpretation and open to speculation. And yeah, sort of from that moment on, I really, really wanted to sort of think about money. Then I got really interested in blockchain in around 2014, I suppose, as a technology that potentially could imagine, other forms of cooperation, or, was just experimenting, I suppose, with different sorts of trust. And I was asked to give a talk at an event in New York, a festival, I think it was called something like Blockchain Horizons. And because I had a background, I guess, in digital art, and I was interested in blockchain, they asked me to speak specifically about the relationship between blockchain and art. And that was kind of one of the first times that I really sort of thought about, how could blockchain potentially be used as a tool for artists? Maybe that could be as a tool for artists to get paid, or how could artists use blockchain to sort of say different kinds of speculative things about value? And so that was a really, really, really interesting event, because it sort of featured some of the earliest people who were doing, experiments with blockchain and blockchain art. But yeah, I guess that's kind of a little bit of a sort of an overview. Just was wondering, maybe maybe we should kind of start with just kind of some very simple questions as well. Like, for example, do either of you own like cryptocurrencies, or do you own the NFTs yourself?
Who goes first?
Maybe.
Martin.
When I was organizing the Money Lab in London a few years ago, and it was very much about, it was very much centered around critical perspectives on cryptocurrencies. I thought the whole time that we were struggling for funding and struggling to figure out how to fund the event. Oh, if only we had like put, a couple £100 into the right currency, the period of time that we were planning, and it would have been super easy. We could have all been flying around all over the world. So I guess in other words, that's to say, I don't really own any significant worthy amounts of any cryptocurrency. A little bit to just how it works and play around with it. But that's really it. And it's interesting to play with, in the sense that it is really very much a gamified technology, how its interfaces work and how its platforms work. And that was a fascinating insight to see how much finance is really gamified. But beyond that, I have no serious holdings, I'm afraid. You, Inte?
No. I think I have a wallet with 0.01 ETH. Yeah, that's not really anything to write home about. But I think that I got that even by just signing up for something. It was kind of a giveaway.
Those were the days.
Sorry?
Those were the days.
No, I recognize also the thought of like when you're organizing something and it's always so hard to get money to really make it as you wanted to make. And I when you said that, I had this thought, like I think also at the IC there's this kind of legend of someone offering some bitcoins way back, and either they got lost or they were, I don't know what happened with them, but we don't have them. But it brought back suddenly, I never thought about that anymore, but like years ago I heard about this like early days at the Institute that someone offered that, and we
Really?
could have been way better off.
I think I'm in a similar position to you, into that I think I've got about $9 in an ETH of Ether and nothing of anything else. And yeah, I don't know. I guess I was like, even though I was always really interested in it, I found the idea, first of all, kind of investing in it a little bit icky. So I only ever had enough just to kind of figure out how it worked. But recently I went back to my wallet because somebody sent me an NFT, which was like a picture. It's a picture actually of a really well-known economic anthropologist who spoke at the first Money Lab in Amsterdam in the Institute of Network Cultures, a guy called Bill Maurer. And very, very early on, some people who were kind of enthusiasts of Bill Maurer's work, they sort of encoded a picture, just an ASCII picture of Bill on the Bitcoin blockchain. So somewhere in there, in one of the hashes is like a little kind of a very basic image of Bill. And so for this project, and I think one of his researchers had turned him into an NFT and made an image of this really ASCII portrait. And he was trying to get people to like bid on it and buy it. So I actually did bid on it and I won it. But then, weirdly, even though I was writing about NFTs and things at the time, I didn't realize how expensive the actual like gas fees were to actually process the transaction. So when it came down to it, even though the NFT only cost about $1, I think the gas fees cost something like $60. So it just wasn't really feasible. I'm wondering, should we do a very quick, do a little kind of a technical overview of what exactly an NFT is?
Yeah,
I don't know if
I
anyone
think
wants
that's a
to
great idea.
volunteer. Yeah, well, I'm happy to do it a bit, but I don't know if anybody would like to volunteer, or we could take sort of different sorts of it.
Oh, if you can start, and maybe we'll add different aspects.
Okay,
Sounds good.
I'll have a little sort of a go anyway at starting it. I'm thinking back to kind of early days of sort of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain, where when I went to that event, for example, in New York, so that there was people there who were kind of, if we think about Bitcoin, it's basically it's a digital ledger for recording transactions. So you're recording kind of the ownership of digital coins and who owns a particular moment in time. But the kinds of utility of that then are quite limited in terms of what you can do. So you're just sort of recording information about transactions digitally. But particularly with Ethereum, I guess in around 2014, the sort of capability then of this sort of digital ledger, the blockchain that kind of underpins Bitcoin, expanded to include not just information, I suppose, about digital transactions and where they were circulating, but also to include all information about the ownership and circulation of all kinds of different things. On the one hand, you sort of had a shift away, I guess, from just recording information about who owns what coin at what particular time, towards coding information about who owns other kinds of things, digital and physical. Alongside then this shift away from just owning coins towards owning things, you also had, I suppose, a expansion of kind of what the Bitcoin script could do. So Ethereum, was so interesting because they sort of allowed all kinds of other sorts of functionality, all sorts of new what are called smart contracts, I guess, to be coded to the blockchain. So for the first time, then that you could not only encode information about the ownership of things like physical or digital works of art or music or stuff, but you could also encode what's called smart contracts, which are information that is designed to kind of automatically execute when you sell something. I think I'm doing a terrible job of this. I'm quite distracted by being in a virtual space and don't have any notes, but that was sort of my first kind of kickoff, which is that we were kind of able, I suppose, to store information about the ownership of art. And then from there, it seemed, you had artists like Kevin McCoy, for example, developing technologies like MoneyGraph. So MoneyGraph system, instead of just encoding, information about where coins were traveling, he started encoding information about digital works of art, Bitcoin blockchain, and sort of using that as a way to allow artists to sell their work and also to kind of record, the provenance and the ownership of their work. I don't know, do you guys want to kind of jump in there or add anything there that you think has kind of been missed or could be really interesting to sort of explain or to move on the discussion of NFTs?
Yeah, I'll just up and run with it and see where we get. I think when I first, when NFTs as a phenomenon came on my radar more earlier or late last year, I guess. The initial thing that I found very baffling about it was that everybody seemed to assume that this was going to be now a surefire way of creating digital objects that were completely unique, existed only once, that somehow therefore could have a value attached to them more easily, and it could be controlled better and all of that sort of thing. And on a lot of the NFT platforms out there, really that's one of the first things that you'll be told about, right? That this is a technology to help you securely control and manage digital artworks or other artifacts, make sure they don't get misappropriated and so forth. And what I found so baffling about that is that from an artistic perspective, one of the things, also art historically speaking, that makes digital as a medium or as an idea so fascinating is that it's really not unique, and it's precisely not something that you draw a painting on a piece of paper and that's the only one that exists. If we throw it in a campfire, it's gone. Well, that's just not true for digital artifacts and digital objects and digital artworks. The very idea that here was a technology that would somehow promise that that became now a possibility, to me a little bit absurd. And I'm still struggling with seeing really how that is a valuable aspect in a creative sense, when in a sense of digital making. And I still see it much more as a way of, as a technology that can assist in monetizing digital artifacts. Monetizing in the sense that, well, if you somehow get other people to believe that this is the only one, then might have a higher value for them for that purpose. And sure, you can record things such as provenance and ownership, as Rachel said, absolutely, in NFTs, and that's very useful and interesting. I guess one of the questions we'll have to be talking about a bit later on is, what does that really mean? What does it mean to record ownership of an NFT? And we can approach that in a philosophical sense, or also in a very technical sense. What do you actually own if you own the NFT version of a JPEG image or something like that? And what does that ownership entitle you to?
Yeah, well, maybe it's actually worth just clarifying that a little bit now. So I was just thinking it might even be useful to kind of sort of think a little bit about even what kind of we mean by an NFT, so by a non-fungible token. So even if we explain what the word fungible means, and economists speak about money, for example, as being, being fungible. Like any $5 bill is supposed to be as good as the other $5 bill. No. And it's kind of a funny one because it's true in principle, but maybe not true in practice, because we probably all have money or notes, that we feel are particularly special. And that we hold on, like 20 euro, for example, that gave me a present when I got engaged that I'll never spend. So in a way, that's kind of, it's non-fungible. It's a special token that I'm never going to spend. But yeah, I guess the idea, with Ethereum was that they developed, this new sort of digital token called a non-fungible token that is, as Martin is kind of gesturing towards, I suppose, it's supposed to encode sort of information about some specific. I think, what's really interesting and maybe what there's a lot of confusion about in relation to fungible tokens is that when you buy an NFT, say you buy an NFT of like something like a crypto kitty, what do you actually own? When you get that, and what's often the case is that you don't own specifically rights to that image. You don't own a physical or even really a digital iteration of that image. All you really own is the smart contract. All you really own is the URL that's pointing to a piece of media that's stored somewhere on the internet. And I just find that idea so fascinating. In terms of why is there so much value around this when all you really own is active ownership itself? You're not really getting anything or not really getting anything other than a contract.
That's also interesting. And if we go into the kind of cursors maybe of NFTs, one that I always think of is this platform called Ascribe that I think back in 2013 already tried to do something that NFTs basically now are doing. It was too early for them, but I think their tagline was an ownership layer for the internet. And I think that says so much. Like it's there's been this drive to kind of capture the digital and capture the internet and everything that's on it, and make it ownable and transferable and draw it into a kind of value system that we know from how money works.
I think sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think Oh, sorry, Inte. No, I was just going to say, I think the Ascribe example is so interesting because, you say they were trying to sort of create, I guess, a form of, you call it digital rights management for digital files and, digital artworks, digital music. So alongside the blockchain, they were also trying to create, as far as I know, some kind of a digital registry, like Content ID or something like YouTube, where they not only would they kind of store ownership details and contracts, but also they would be somehow kind of referring or using that information then to kind of keep track of digital files and kind of copyright infringement.
And it kind of goes back to also this idea of like I immediately also start thinking of things like sampling and like creative processes that are really against that blocking of. I'm wondering also like how that relates to what we're now seeing with this ownership being thought of as so kind of immutable on the blockchain. That the blockchain is supposed that's one of the main words people use to describe the value of blockchain, is that it's immutable. You cannot change it once it's in the system, in the ledger. It's there forever. I think especially when we're talking about creative processes and creative works, these things like are multiple and like changing and yeah, I'm kind of waiting for something to kind of like critique that or break that, like what Martin was saying before, this kind of artworks that try to disassemble the technology. I wonder if there's something that could be done in that direction as well.
Well, I mean, something that's already happening in this direction. I mean, I think there are artistic experiments that are very interesting that play with that. But also, and I'm now forgetting the name of that platform. Maybe one of you two knows that. It's essentially works a little bit like a hedge fund type of thing, or the value that is held the community are NFTs. And now keep in mind, these are supposed to be non-fungible, right? Like they're supposed to be unique items that either you have it or you don't. And inside of that platform, get fractionalized. They get pooled together, all these NFTs, and a value token is generated based on a fraction of the assumed value that the collection has. Then that becomes a fungible token again. It becomes a fungible, tradable unit of value. To me, that really is revelatory. It really reveals to me that in many contexts, in all contexts, but I think in many contexts, the assumption that this is a revolutionary, disruptive thing, helpful for artists, that is true in many contexts, then also lends itself to really what I find to be quite problematic kind of refinancialization or financialization efforts.
We talked, do you think, a little bit about this idea of like financialization of art? Because it does sort of seem that like particularly maybe since the financial crash, that the idea of art as being just another financial asset has become really significant. Remember, for example, reading this quote from Stefan Simkowitz, who's a kind of LA-based art dealer who's very, very well known for sort of speculating, I guess, in art markets. This was a quote that he was quoted saying shortly after, I suppose, the Brexit vote, that art was a currency like any other, and that it would be kind of a really good hedge against volatility in other markets, and volatility in other currencies like sterling, following Brexit, and I feel like very much with kind of stability, maybe Brexit, the financial crash, maybe even now with the pandemic, people turn to sort of alternative stores of value, or I suppose, sort of hedge, to hedge their bets against, things that are changing in other markets. And it seems like we've seen a real rise then of art as an asset class. So we've seen the rise of art-backed lending. We're using paintings as securities on loans. We've seen the rise of kind of different art hedge funds, and also the rise of free port spaces where and artworks are being kind of held indefinitely to avoid paying duty, that are kind of like banks for art. I wondered, do you guys see then, is it really obvious that NFTs maybe are sort of a part of this kind of broader financialization of art, where art is increasingly less of a commodity or craft and much more of actually financial asset?
Well, I would distinguish and say that I don't think art is such,
Okay.
but I think what art is becoming in these blockchain or NFT context, then we get, I think, very close to realize that art has that function and works that way. Even when I hear the most of anti-capitalist and self-professed kind of radical left activists in the blockchain space, when I hear them talk about their ideas and their technologies that they're building, I still feel like, wow, but the rhetoric, the language you're using to talk about all this is the language of speculation, accumulation of value, trolling and managing the movement and flow of these values. Is to me the language of capital, and not the language of any other political infrastructure. And when that started happening in art context, well, then it's still the language of capital, and it's not so much the language of art. And for me, always a really good way to think about this in a broader art historical context is to think a little bit backwards to conceptual art of the 60s and 70s, where there were many artists who were clearly critical of big auction houses and the institutionalization of the art market, and who were really keen to develop ways to combat that or to rebel against that. And in doing so, they did things such as make artworks that don't really exist tangibly, materially, but that only exist as contracts. That sounds very familiar, right? Like that's basically also in some ways what a digital blockchain-based NFT artwork might be. And anyway, so there's a history of this in other parts of the art world. What's really fascinating about it is that many of those conceptual artists grew immensely frustrated when they realized the dematerialization of their art practice actually just made their art much more easily assimilated to the high-stakes art market. And that they realized, well, they actually end up having less control over what art means or how it circulates than they would have if they would have maybe have a painting hanging in the hallway or in the bathroom, and they really know what's going on with that painting. So there's an interesting art historical dimension to just experimenting with resisting the relation of creative practice and capital, never quite succeeding. And in my mind, it's again now not really succeeding, or not so far anyways. You think about that?
There's an Yves Klein work, just speaking about this kind of conceptual work that I find really interesting in relation to NFTs. It's called something like Transfer a Zone of Material Pictorial Sensibility or something like that. Don't quote me on it. I don't have notes or anything in front of me. But it was made in like the 1960s. And Klein basically, who was a conceptual artist, so he didn't really produce that much in the subject, sold basically invisible immaterial zones off the River Seine as artworks to people. People acquired the work by giving Klein gold, like real gold, gave kind of half of the gold to him and threw the other half in the river. In return then for this kind of purchase, Klein gave the participant or the buyer a certificate So far, kind of it sounds quite like a NFT in some ways. It's a kind of an immaterial work. You don't get anything, but you get a certificate. What I really like about it, I guess, is that client said in order to actually possess or to own the work, you had to destroy the certificate. You had to tear it up. I find that quite interesting when we think about NFTs, but also maybe when we think about these kinds of ideas of ownership as well, and what does it actually mean to own or possess work? Art?
I mean,
I guess, where does the value reside of an artwork as well, right? Is it the monetary value that's kind of immaterial and abstract as well, but you could realize it at any moment by selling the artwork that you have? Is that what the value of an artwork is, or is it feeling that it gives you, or the aesthetic satisfaction you derive from looking at it? There's so many fascinating ways in which different notions of value collapse or collide and then kind of explode in this context.
I mean, this also makes me think of by Sarah Friend recently. I think Martin, you also talked about it recently. It's called Off, which really so it's an NFT, but it's a series of NFTs that together, people buy one or more of them, but they have to kind of they are just kind of back kind of boxes of like little a group of pixels on your screen. But when you put them together, they will reveal the actual like location of the artwork. So you have to the buyers of the NFTs have to collaborate to have, unveil the value of it. And that sounds to me like a really interesting kind of reversal of some of the same things that we're seeing in the kind of art as an asset, as a financial asset.
I'd love to come back and, because I think a really nice place to finish as well would be to think about some of these speculative projects that they're just wrapped in kind of NFTs. But I'm just thinking in terms of our audience as well, people might actually just be interested, at least, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, are NFTs a way for digital artists or, non-digital artists to actually make a living? And I wondered what you guys thought about that. Do you think, is there any sort of potential for artists to actually make any money from NFTs?
Absolutely. I mean, I know so many digital artists whose work I have admired for a long time and who have a really standing in the community, considered pioneers in what they do, and who were never able to, or very rarely able to get paid well for the work that they do, or sell their work in any meaningful capacity, or get the platform and exposure of big auction houses like Christie's or Sotheby's or whatnot. And now they can. And so that's of course, that's incredible and that's amazing. And there are really big shifts going on in terms of who has the power to make that happen or to keep that from happening. And a lot of that power just evaporated, and of this gatekeeping function that gallerists might have had, or collectors, or auction houses, and in a lot of ways, artists have been liberated in their practice because of that. But I mean, we have many precedents for this as well. I mean, it might have sounded amazing when iTunes or Spotify came about the first time around, and people were like, "Yeah, we don't need a record studio anymore. No intermediary between me as a musician and my audience anymore. I can get paid directly through these platforms for the work I do." That's of course that's true, but also you get also ripped off in time. So, and that is, I think that's also replicated again as well on some of these platforms. Rachel, you mentioned earlier you bought an NFT and the artwork was really cheap, but the fees you had to pay were really high. I mean, that doesn't sound like a solution to the problem of how are artists able to sell their work, right? So I don't know. I think that it has kind of opened things up, and artists definitely able to make money so much more easily and much more so, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also making a distinction between those hyped sales that have were reported in the news all around the world. You know, the Beeples and those really really massive like figures that were paid. Of course, those are part of the hype, but I think there's people are really building also communities and kind of more bottom-up platforms or collaborations, or maybe like the NFT that you mentioned before, Martin, where it was kind of NFTs within an NFT, where this is, I guess, where I think the real kind of more sustainable promise of NFTs could be that I am not so interested in the massive of hyped sales, but what is happening like more on a more maybe mundane level, and who gets to be included there, and yeah, what's possible to a real kind of day-to-day kind of sustaining yourself kind of level. Yeah, and I think there are possibilities there.
I'd be kind of with you, I guess, in that I remember when I was sort of delving into it, you say you see kind of made aware of those sorts of like unicorny moments where, you know, an artist makes a revenue from an NFT, but actually somebody went and did, I think, kind of a more focused study of the sale of kind of NFTs recently. You know, when you kind of got down into it, the actual average revenue for works was negligible, and even more so than when you took into account the like transaction cost of actually doing the sale. Just to say nothing, I suppose, of the kind of environmental or kind of sustainability aspect of this. I don't know, do we want to sort of talk a little bit about that maybe? What are your thoughts on the kind of environmental sustainability of work and NFTs?
I mean, I'm sure everybody here has heard and read about all this. It really is kind of a hot topic, literally.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I feel in the last maybe in the last month and a half, actually seeing a lot of digital artists popping up on highly questionable NFT platforms that are, you know, that work with proof of work verification protocols and therefore consume a lot of energy for the minting and transactions. And so it seems like that outrage over the energy consumption of, you know, the Ethereum network, for example, is a little bit quieted down, unfortunately, because it's still that hasn't changed at all, right? The only thing that happened is that everyone is convinced themselves that Ethereum will soon shift to a proof of stake verification protocol. It's much more energy efficient. And in the meantime, well, we'll just carry on and minting with Ethereum on the Ethereum blockchain because it'll soon all change. But so it seems like that outrage around the environmental impact of the technology was a bit, it was very justified, but it seemed not to have any follow through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is true. Like it almost with Ethereum, it seemed like almost this incantation or something, like it will be better, or you know, there's this belief that soon they will go to a better system. And there's also so many alternatives happening, and I think it's interesting to look at those smaller projects that are really trying to like define how things could be better from the start. With that, like I have a hard time like seeing something so big as Ethereum moving any fast way towards a better system. Sure, if you guys the same.
No, I think you're probably dead right. I mean, maybe we should explain that currently blockchain systems use a system called proof of work to basically make sure that records are correct and haven't been tampered with. And the way that it's designed makes it very computationally expensive, I guess, to use the kind of computer science term, or very, very kind of energy intensive. So it uses huge amounts of energy to sort of add these transactions. And the way the transactions are added then involves this sort of arbitrary thing called a proof of work. Rather than proof of work, potentially there's other alternatives like proof of stake, where instead of sort of doing this really expensive calculation, you kind of are allowed to sort of sign records on a blockchain based, I guess, on your stake in that platform, on your kind of on kind of your I guess your ownership and your significance within that. The logic being that you're not going to screw over something that you're really invested in. But it does, I think Martin Ruby is right, that I'm so surprised that there hasn't been kind of more of a withdrawal from NFTs because of the environmental. I read an interesting article. I wonder if other of you had come across it actually, because I didn't see it getting that much. It was shared on Monday Labs list. It's an artist called Geraldine Juarez. And I'm actually reminded of her right now because we're standing around a campfire. One of the first pieces that I ever saw, I guess, about Bitcoin was a piece that Geraldine did back in about 2013 or 2014, where she burned Bitcoin on an SD card in a bonfire, actually, in Berlin. So she's always kind of been an artist who's very, very critical of Bitcoin, very, very critical of blockchain. And she's written this interesting article, which is called something like Ghost Chains, where she's sort of arguing for a complete abandonment of the blockchain system, that we all just sort of move completely away from it. I get the feeling that Inte, with your work, that you're sort of thinking about maybe other sorts of more socially beneficial alternatives. Maybe this is something you were looking at, for example, in your PhD.
Sorry, I was looking for the article while you were talking, and I missed the last
sorry,
part.
guys. Yeah, no worries, no worries. I mean, she's a really interesting writer. She's very polemic. She's quite angry in the piece. So even for that, I think it's quite interesting, as a piece of writing, because she's just really like fed up with the whole thing. Then at the end, she sort of calls for all blockchains should become ghost chains, that they should be completely destroyed. But I guess I brought it up partly because she's so critical. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I guess I would actually ask Martin to talk about his cake chain idea, because I think that's a really interesting one.
I gave a talk a little while ago, and I was trying to think about chains or platforms, networks, communities that embody some of the qualities of what the blockchain is supposed to embody, but do it differently and outside or beyond an idea of the accumulation of wealth and capital. And I came up with this what I called the cake chain, and it's based on this game that we played in primary school that maybe some of people here know as well. And basically, it all revolves around a cake. It's made partly with sourdough. And so one day in school, one of your friends will bring a cake and everybody gets a slice, and it's all about sharing. And also maybe you will get a little bit of sourdough to take home. And then you get home and you with your mom or dad next week, you feed the sourdough, you help it grow and not kind of go bad. At the end of the week, you make another cake, and you make the batter, and then you divide it up, and you a quarter of it you use for cake making. The other 3 parts you give to your friends. And so, it's the next element in the cake chain, and it doesn't function without community. It doesn't work unless you give it away to others. You can only get something if you also give something away, and the value really is in the connection, community. Anyways, that's the cake chain.
I love that.
Anybody else know
Traded
this game?
notepaper. Oh no, we traded notepaper, but it was way more kind of like a sort of exercise in the free market, really, and like. So I really like your idea. This is like this really like
totally
social
non-market,
kind of.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
I mean, I think I pushed the concept a little bit further in the talk, and I ended up feeling like, it's the blockchain. Every entry is immutable, and you can't really once you put something on the blockchain, it can't be taken away. Once you add your own personal piece of sourdough to the cake, and then pass it on to a friend, it's the same kind of idea, and you become part of this mutable chain of participation events and baking and sharing events.
I mean, I think you even went to this kind of this entanglement of like, all the way down the line, a piece of your starting cake will still be down there, and it will like be influenced by all these other cakes that people bring to the
Totally.
chain.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really interesting kind of way of bringing blockchain in relation to like this to nature and to ecology and all those kinds of concepts.
Yeah.
I mean,
like
in many
trust,
ways, those are the most interesting artworks as well, right? I don't know, Rachel, maybe you were going to say something similar, that the most fascinating blockchain art projects are like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was thinking like, what your project brings up for me, I guess, is this idea of money as being trust. So, like, we're kind of virtually, I guess, in Ireland, we're in Carlow. And, one of my favorite examples of money as trust is an Irish example where the banks closed because of banking strikes in the late 60s and early 70s. But the money system didn't collapse. So instead, actually, local people in local communities like publicans or shopkeepers, they emerged and started acting as banks and actually guaranteeing cash and checks for people and accepting IOUs. And it's such a fascinating example of, when we get down to it, money and these sorts of systems, they're systems of kind of social trust. And so for me, a bit like you're saying, the kind of more maybe interesting examples then of artworks using blockchain deal very much with those ideas of community or ideas of trust. I was at this random blockchain event a couple of years ago, which was actually using blockchain to secure military supply chains. So I was in the States, and I learned a lot about how military supply chains aren't very secure. But at some point, somebody said, I was chatting to somebody on the break, and they were like, well, for us, the blockchain isn't that interesting. What's interesting is, that the blockchain is sort of allowing us to have conversations about digitizing our paper trails. So that's not very interesting, maybe,
Right.
but it really kind of hit home to me. Okay, so maybe we don't like what's happening on the blockchain, but actually just create the space to have these conversations about what kind of move do we want, what kind of society do we want. And for me, really interesting art projects that use NFTs are asking, what kind of a value system do we want and what do we value?
Yeah.
And I think also, I mean, for me, I'm really interested in like how the complexity of the technology is kind of used in a way to also like think about like to think around the technology, not being necessarily exactly what it does, but what possibly could be in the future, or what we could potentially now rework the technology to do. And there's an interesting space. Like it gets misused a lot by people trying to scam other people. Like with blockchain, there's a lot of scamming going on just because the technology is so complex, but at the same time seems so such a good way to kind of make some money. But at the same time, also that complexity allows for kind of thinking it even further and thinking of like what futures we might envision with it. And I think that's really interesting.
I think we have 5 minutes left, and I'm just seeing kind of some notes there that we're sort of really need to wrap it up. So I don't know, are we taking like questions from the floor, or does anybody have any questions?
I saw a hand earlier, but
yeah.
Hi.
So, one question I have is just, I know you were talking about kind of the democratization of how this is kind of democratized art to not be in the hands of sort of institutions and stuff like that. And this is similar to the music industry in that way. With that, how do you think that like skill of the artist is affected? Do you think that have artists, if they're using NFTs, are they more programmers now, and does it take away from the actual skill of art?
Such a great question. I think MoneyGraph is a really interesting example of that, because they created a system. They were trying to create a really kind of straightforward system where people didn't have to be programmers, that they could kind of just use very, very intuitive interface that just had like icons. But I think that's such an interesting question. I don't know what your thoughts are, Martin and Inte.
Well, Inte.
I'm also thinking of like a lot of the work that's happening at Furtherfield, where they're doing a lot of projects around blockchain technologies for the arts, and have a really, I mean, maybe this is not directly like artists selling works as NFTs, but they have I remember a workshop that they did where basically they designed blockchain systems using paper and post-its and printed pie charts, and I think that's also a really interesting area where like this kind of basically it is very theoretical, like it's a very like thinking about NFTs and about blockchains is really conceptual, and it doesn't have to be technical.
I think that's true, and there's definitely a lot of the platforms that are available now. They are trying to streamline it. You do not have to be a programmer. You do not have to be a blockchain developer. God knows, none of us could probably be that or do that. Technology is so complicated and complex. But Inte, you mentioned. Go ahead. Yeah.
Do you think about how the digital has affected music? It's actually helped. Like it hasn't changed the way a musician plays an instrument. With art, it kind of has.
You're saying digital platforms haven't really changed how musicians play instruments?
I mean, if you're a musician and you play an instrument, the digital has helped you reach more people. As with NFTs, it's kind of changed how the art is made. So it's affected it in process.
But I guess
isn't it true that a lot of
painters make paintings, and sorry, I was just thinking like Instagram has affected how painters are painting, and Spotify is definitely affecting how musicians are making music now, and that you have music that's designed to really like grip people in the first 15 seconds or whatever the amount is to be paid. So I think it's a really good point, though, Christina. Yeah.
I think you're right, Rachel. That I mean, the technologies we use have always shaped things did we do, and that's a good thing. I think we shouldn't imagine that these activities, whether we make art or make music or write or anything, that these things exist in isolation of the technologies that we use to do them. What you've pointed out really well, I think, with your question is that there is a social dimension and there is a networking dimension, and maybe a dimension to the reach that artists can now have. Is definitely reshaped very, very dramatically NFT technology. For all intents and purposes, that can only be an exciting opportunity for artists, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Okay, well, I see it's 7 o'clock here, so maybe it's probably time that we wrap it up, unless there's any other kind of burning questions. Maybe we'll just say,
Anybody
I
else?
just want to say a big thanks. So I just want to say a big thanks to Martin and to Inte for your really kind of fascinating insights, as well as to everybody in the team, in both Carlow Arts Festival and in Carlow, for supporting this event and space. I think we were going to kind of finish things up by moving over to the Braun space, actually, where some of the works are currently hosted. So I don't know, maybe we could follow Joe. I feel like I'll get lost if everyone follows me. But it's probably behind me, right?
In front, yeah, thank you so
Oh
much,
yeah, it's right
Rachel.
behind me. Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks a million, Rachel and Inte and Martin. That was brilliant. So it's just, if anyone wants to take a wee peek into the Braun building, now's a good time. Go up the ramp and push away. And next talk back here is 8 o'clock. Thanks,
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll see you back. I'll see you back at 8.
Hey, Christina.
Yeah?
Can you hear me? It's Kate.
Where are you?
Hi, how are you?